Hello and welcome back to Bleeding Blue. This is a New York Football Giants history podcast. My name is Justin, and this week we are bringing you what I think is a pretty darn good interview with Big Blue VCR. If you don't know who Big Blue VCR is, you got to get on Twitter. And even if you're on Twitter, you don't know who he is, shame on you. He is an encyclopedia of Giants history. You can give him a follow at Big Blue VCR. He has hard drives and hard drives and hard drives of decades and decades of Giants games, and he publishes them, he clips them up, and he publishes them for us all to kind of relive and see as Giants fans. I mean, this franchise has such a rich history. He loves to relive it. He's a Giants fan, just like all of us. And this is the first kind of interview that he's ever done. So I guess without further ado, we talk Giants history. We have a lot of fun. Here is Big Blue VCR. All right, welcome back to Bleeding Blue. We want to welcome on a very special guest, a guest who we've wanted to have on for a long time, but somebody who recently during draft season, I was kind of shocked and very thankful that he reached out to me and he reached out to us during one of our draft streams. And I briefly mentioned Bleeding Blue as a Giants history show. And honestly, in my opinion, the most and the best Giants history account out there, Big Blue VCR at Big Blue VCR on Twitter. You're here. You're joining us. Now, here's my first question. I want to ask you, how are you? But also, is this your first podcast interview where you've been on and you're talking and you're kind of sharing some thoughts of Giants history with another show?
Well, yeah, Justin, nice to meet you. Happy to be here with Snacks as well. And the answer is yes. This is my maiden voyage on any type of podcast or interview. This is the first one that I've been invited to.
No, and your rise has been so unique as an account. That kind of shocks me, because pretty much from day one, and I was telling you this a little bit before the show, I have a feeling, you're not doing this for the followers. You're doing this because I think you have a love for this great franchise. You have a love for this great football team that still is, and it's great history. And you have so much stored that you're willing to share with everyone, which is awesome, and have everybody relive, especially some of the older fans relive a lot of the glory days, and a lot of the great moments, and even some of the bad moments of this franchise too, which Snacks will talk about. But talk to us about why did you want to get this account started, this Big Blue VCR account started? Why in the world were you keeping track of, years and decades of Giants games, and how in the world did you get to turn to Twitter to put all this out?
No, that's a great question, and it's the type of thing where I would agree with you. It's not something that I do for to create followers or buzz. It's very much like what you see is what you get. It's something that I call a passion project, something that I do just it's something that I enjoy, and I'm the type of person that if I see somebody else wearing a Giants hat or Giants shirt, I immediately like that person, and I'm like, oh, you're good, you're on the good side of the law over here. And I created the Twitter account years ago, and I actually created a blog back in the mid 2000s, about 2015, something like that. And I was just reviewing old Giant games, and I got into a lot of detail on what the games were. And my thought was, what if I go and I do a really in-depth review of games and look at it from a historical perspective and say, this is the game that Phil Simms threw 3 touchdowns, and comparatively, here's how many that Kerry Collins threw, how many Eli Manning threw, and tried to do some type of just review and looking back and see what that means. And it really was nothing more than I said like a passion project. And I would post some links on Twitter about it, and it didn't really go too far, but it was fine. It was just something that I was doing. I'm a season ticket holder, and every now and then I would post stuff. There is one part of it that actually I became Twitter famous for about 2 seconds was the Daniel Jones draft. And the reason for that is, if you go back and you look at the day Daniel Jones was drafted, I go to the Giants draft party every year because I'm a season ticket holder. And I normally meet a couple of friends of mine to go to the draft, but they couldn't go that day. So I just went with another friend, and what they asked me to do is they're like, hey, can you record the pick for us? And you just look what the stadium looks like. So I did. And I went and, was sitting in the little overhang, because it was kind of drizzly that day. It was a little cold and drizzly that day for the draft. And when Goodell announced Daniel Jones, I said, "Oh no."
In the 2019 NFL Draft, the New York Giants select Daniel Jones.
Then I put the camera down and pick back up, and they had like, all of these, like you see the people like, like in shock in Giant Stadium.
Mhm.
And I just sort of tweeted that. I sent it to my friends and I just tweeted it out. There's another like, long-standing website, the Big Blue Interactive, which has been around forever on the
Yep.
internet. So I sent it to the Big Blue Interactive guys, and it got picked up by like Mike Garafolo, and it got picked up by Barstool, and it got almost 1 million views. And my phone was going crazy, and I was just like, "Oh, what is this?" And I actually felt horrible the day that it happened, because I'm just some idiot in the stands doing this thing. This is Daniel Jones, like, biggest moment of his life. And then I felt terrible that, like, did I do something to kind of get him off on the wrong foot? Like, here's Giant fans hating Daniel Jones second, he hasn't even worn the uniform yet, and everyone's angry about this pick. So I actually wrote a blog post about it, almost like, explaining like, how this thing happened, what I was doing. And the real story behind my "oh no" and scream was, I actually wanted the Giants to draft the defensive player. Old school as a Giants fan. I wanted a defensive player. Like everyone else, I'm like, "Oh, Daniel Jones will be there at pick 17. So when we started hearing pick 6, I'm like, that seems a little bit of a reach for this. And I shouted over to my friend who's sitting next to me at the time. I'm like, "I really hope it's not Daniel Jones, because we can get him later." And that's when I recorded, and then you hear me yell, "Oh no." So, and then I went and I actually that night found the clips of Phil Simms' draft when he was drafted, and everyone was like, you have Pete Rozelle on the smoky podium, and he's and they announce Phil Simms, and you hear the people like "Rah!" yelling and stuff.
Mhm.
So I posted a comparative thing, and I said, what, like, for Daniel Jones, I really hope that he can look back at this and have the same success Phil Simms has, because I'm a Giants fan first and foremost. I don't root against the players in the team. Once you're wearing Giants blue, I'm rooting for you, and I want you to do well. So I hope that you do well. So that one post, like I said, I was getting all these weird alerts. I was getting asked, like, "Can we show your video in Japan and stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." After that, my Twitter account was pretty kind of dormant for a while. Just was tweeting thoughts now and then. What really kind of supercharged it, I guess, if that's the word you want to use, was during the pandemic. I was, home, working from home, and I have, all these hard drives with all these old Giant games on them. And being able to work from home, having access to all my files right there, I was like, "Yeah, it'd be kind of cool. What if I just start doing, cut up some of these clips?" And I wanted to focus on the games that were not easily findable. Like, you can buy the DVD sets for, like the games from, the 86 playoff run and 90 and, 2007, 2011. I'm like, what if I go and I find these regular season games that a lot of people don't have? And I start posting those and those clips. And I think the fact that there was no sports going on for that period, and people had like nothing to do, and like, like you're looking for anything that's a distraction. That distraction plus nostalgia plus everyone's stuck at home kind of gravitated people to my account. And from there, I started getting feedback from people, like overwhelmingly positive. Like, Twitter can be an interesting place, but for the most part, I have to say that, like, I've had nothing but a good experience. People are, I try to be respectful in my posts. I don't, try to, like, call out players. I mean, every now and then, if I have an Eagle highlight or something, I can't help it. But, I try to be positive when I'm doing it. And it just is kind of like built.
Snacks, you should take some notes.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah. And it just built up from there. And, a number of like the media started following, like Carl Banks, members of the Giants started like following what's going on. And it really has kind of taken off from there.
See, to me, that it's an unbelievable rise from just a hobby that you wanted and your passion for it. And it's amazing to me. It really is, because, as a Giant fan like myself, I'm a very sane Giant fan. So it's casual and realistic Giants fan that I am, but I appreciate. What are you laughing at, Justin?
Nothing. Keep going. You're doing good.
Yeah. So I have alerts on for your tweets, and this week was a little different. And I need to know. I'm gonna take my glasses off because I'm pissed. I need to know what went into your mind this week and last week to decide it was pain week for all of us Giants fans who have, in my opinion, felt pretty good about the offseason and the season moving forward. And you just decided with your platform, as good as it is, and like I said, I am fully respectful of everything you did and what you built and the guys, the players and athletes you interacted with. But out of the blue, you just think it's okay to come out and give us pain during pain week. So if you don't mind me asking, did you run out of good clips, or was it just you wanted to torture others because maybe you had a bad week, maybe
And also
something was
knowing
gone?
Twitter, you and good for your base if you didn't, but you had to lose some followers because I know Twitter and I know people, and people will unfollow you if even like if you're posting too much negativity and everything like that. So pain week, what was the thought process in that, and how many followers did you lose?
Okay. Believe it or not, I actually gained followers during pain week.
Wow, unbelievable.
That's how good you are.
Unbelievable.
That's how good you are.
And like it was, I gained another like, a couple hundred here and there during, and I thought the same thing. I'm like, wow, I'm really going to piss a bunch of people off for this one. But, I tried to at least explain as much as I could for like what was going on. And to kind of describe it, last year when when things were picking up, especially over the summer, a couple of times I opened up the floor to any of the followers. I was like, hey, it's request week. What do you guys want to see? And if I have it, I'll show it. And I did that. And a lot of the stuff, obviously people want to see the good things. A few people wanted to see bad stuff. And I have to say that when I first started doing this, and by this, I mean, having old Giant tapes, I used to tape over the losses. I didn't want to keep them. I didn't want to see that again. Like, this was a nightmare. Back in the 80s, there's no internet. Like, you had limited ability to sort of watch this stuff. Maybe ESPN had Sports Center now and then. So all you had was basically, your VHS tapes and going back and watching it. So I would tape over them all where I could. Over time, as I started collecting games, I'm like, you know what? Like, I'll just start taking even the losses and just having, just so I have it for whatever, maybe one day I want to look back, or there was something good that happened in a game and a loss that, now that enough time has passed, I can watch it. One of my followers, Mark Zinio, he asked me last year, and he said, hey, would you do something and start showing, some of like the more like, awful, painful clips like Flipper and, the Miracle of the Meadowlands and Deshaun and all that stuff. And I first was like, no, I don't want to do that. and then he asked again, and I was like, you know what? I sort of relented. I was like, I'll do it in the off season. And it's one of those things where, I said it back in, I don't know, sometime in last August. And as minicamp was finishing up, I was like, you know what the hell? Like, now's the time that's better. So I'm going to try to actually make this a spin that minicamp is ending. I am going to show the bad stuff that you're looking for. I'm going to have a spin on it instead, though, that let's get all the bad karma out of the way, legal stuff in there, but other ones, I was like, wow, I remember this game. Like, that totally sucked. And this totally sucked. And it started snowballing, and 1 week turned into two. So that's how Pain Week came about, but it's about to be over, and we're gonna have like a little ceremony when this thing is done and get ready for a division championship. So I'm hoping that this is the thing that kind of clears the path for the Giants. We got to get rid of the bad ghosts. That's my goal.
And you know what? I'm very appreciative of you trying to emphasize your power and, with the videos of all the pain that we've suffered through over the years. I I respect it. And I truly believe that the Giants go 1-16 this year. So I will always look back on Pain Week and from Big Blue VCR and blame you.
Mhm.
Now that I have a scapegoat, that's about as good a thing you ever could have done for me. No, but that's actually a great great origin for it. And it is good. Like, we're a Giants history podcast and you are Giants history. So this is a very good dynamic. And the losses that hurt the most, those victories that we all love, that you post, that we talk about, make them even sweeter. So it is very appreciative. We haven't spent a single second on the fact that you clearly are a big Giants fan. And, we all have our story as to how we became a Giant fan, why we're a Giant fan. But can you tell us how your fandom came about? Like, what makes you the Giant fan you are? Was it a family member? Was it an experience? Anything that you could kind of provide to just shed light on the fandom that you have for Big Blue?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the first thing is, like most Giant fans, I live in northern New Jersey, which tends to be Giants country. Giant tickets have been in my family since Yankee Stadium. So
wow.
that's the type of
Wow.
thing where it's like, traditional, like,
You got no choice.
Yeah, you have no choice. Like you don't, you leave the family or you're a Giant fan. And it's, like it's, Yankee fan, Giant fan. That's the kind of how, I was raised. But the thing that, so there was never a choice, but the thing that actually added the cherry on top was the fact that I went to the same high school that Bill Parcells went to. And I note that in my little Twitter handle, I have like a little bit of like a wise ass thing where I say home of Dwayne Parcells, because his first name is actually Dwayne. And Bill Parcells went to Riverdale, which is where I went in Oradell, New Jersey. And his brother actually was the head of Oradell Recreation. And when I was a kid back in the 80s, my famous story, and his brother, Doug Parcells, and he said, like, he passed away a couple of years ago or a year ago. Doug oversaw all of Oradell Rec, and everyone obviously is big Giant fans because you're around him and in town. And the famous story I have was when I was in Little League in like 82, 83, something like that. Doug Parcells was umpiring the game. And, his brother Bill is the coach of the Giants at the time. And I remember like getting a walk. And I remember somebody saying, once you walk, just go straight to second base and dare him to throw you out. So I tried that and I went and I did it. And I go to second base and Doug Parcells tells me to go back. And I'm like, no, these guys didn't know to throw me out. That's their problem. And being a Yankee fan at the time, Billy Martin was the manager for like the 80th time of the Yankees, because at the time George Steinbrenner kept firing and bringing back, and his big thing was kicking dirt. So I got a little hot and I started kicking dirt like all over like second base. And Doug Parcells ran me from the game, from a Little League game. And I remember seeing my parents in the stands just like staring at me like, you dumbass. But the point being that growing up in my town, like, where Parcells used to eat at a restaurant called Hagler's, which is in Oradell, all the time. And he had a special table in the back. So I grew up basically not only around from the Giants fans of just my family, but with Bill Parcells and everything he was about right in my town, with his family, like in my town, and was always around. Because back then in the 80s, a lot of these Giants were all over kind of like Bergen County. Like that's just sort of like where they were. And growing up there, you were just around it. And, I was growing up at a time when the Giants were, like hot, like, when I'm 10 years old is 84. And that's when you really start to kind of, clinch on your team. And that's when the Giants started their run. So kind of like all the moons aligned that I was going to be a Giant fan.
Snacks, isn't Oradell like right down the road from where you live?
Yeah, I was almost going to say to our friend Big Blue VCR right here, Coach Parcells' brother used to umpire and referee all my games too. I grew up in Emerson.
Okay. Yep. Right next door.
So,
yep. Town over.
Right next door.
Lucky
I know
strike
exactly.
lanes.
I was trying to hold my tongue or bite my tongue the whole time, because everything you said was exactly what I know. And it's great. He was a tall guy too.
Yep.
And he was a very, very nice, sweet, gentle, respectful guy. This is Bill's brother, Justin. And he was a great ref, great umpire, great everything. And we never got to play Oradell because they had a lot more kids in their high school than us. But the Oradell field is named after Parcells' brother, is it not?
Yep. Yeah, it's the DPAC, the Doug Parcells Athletic Complex.
Yes.
That's right by the swim club.
It's gorgeous.
Yep, right by the swim club over there. So yeah, I know it very well.
So it sounds like two brothers they're a little different from each other, character-wise.
No, Doug, I've never met Bill. Well, I guess I probably have at some point, just the type of thing in passing.
Haven't we all met Bill in one way or another?
Yeah,
in some capacity.
How much we know about him and how much we know about the team at this point. So,
but their voices seems sounded, like it. Yeah, their voices sounded very similar. Like if you heard Doug Parcells talk, like his voice, that you can't even describe like the way Bill Parcells' voice sounds, but you know it when you hear it. Like Doug was the same way. Like he had that same kind of tone to his voice. So yeah, it's he had the same sort of like wise guy personality. Like you're growing up in northern New Jersey, like you can't take yourself too seriously, otherwise someone's gonna take you down. So he was the same way.
Oh, well, it is funny that Bill Parcells' brother was probably the only referee / umpire that my father never tried to like berate. So that's when we were playing in Little League. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And listen, Big Blue VCR, if you're still around North Jersey, beer's on me.
All right. I could probably take you up on that. Like I said, when the season starts, I got my season tickets, so I'm going to be there. Coming, I'll be there coming this, for the games. And that's the other thing we can talk about is the season tickets have been my family. I started going to games in '87. So actually I missed I missed the '86 run. And in hindsight, I understand why, because my cousins went to the games, and to be fair to them, they had sat through all the crap in the '70s and everything before that. So when they're in that run, they're like, look, you're 12 years old. I know you love the Giants, all this stuff, but we've bled and died and sat out here for some,
we deserve this.
We deserve this. Like we sat out there and we watched Herm Edwards score. Like, you can wait. So that was fine. I started going in '87. Actually, the first game I went to in my seats was the '87 game against the Patriots, which is the first ESPN game. And I've actually shown a couple of those clips every now and then on the Twitter account. Mm-hmm. So I have a soft spot in my heart for that game because that's the first one I went to. No one else would remember that game. I mean, the Giants were, like the season went down the toilet right away because they started 0-2. They had the worst strike team. So the season was over before it began.
It was a bad strike. Yeah. I briefly looked into it. It was such a bad strike team. It was pathetic.
Well, yeah, I mean the
Vince Papale.
Yeah, the Giants basically signed guys off like loading docks. Like they never took it seriously. They didn't, while the Redskins and like the 49ers were like loading up like on the best team that they could find, the Giants are basically like, we're gonna pretend this is not happening. And then they just signed anybody. And you saw like, I posted the highlight of like that one, crazy catch on Monday Night Football with the 49ers. Like, that was like it. And they had like Edwin Lovelady, who, because I just remember his name, making decent catches, but otherwise they were just out and out garbage. And the Giants had the misfortune of facing the 49ers and the Redskins, the two best. So they were destroyed in their two games. And the last game they played Buffalo, which is a game that like set the game of football back about 50 years, because Lawrence Taylor crossed the picket line and he played in that game. And the Bills left tackle literally held him every play. And I think the quote after the game from Marv Levy was like, they can't call holding every play, so just do it. And that's kind of how they handled it. LT played tight end in that game. But yeah, but anyway, so I started going to games in '87, splitting the tickets to my cousin, and over time, for the most part, I go to pretty much like every game. Now, like, my cousin may go to one or two, otherwise I go to all the rest.
You just mentioned LT. There's such an allure around LT. There's such an allure around Harry Carson. There's even such an allure. We were just talking about Bill Parcells. There's such an allure around them. And, especially somebody like me, I only know of the allure. Mm-hmm. I don't know about watching them live. So is there a sense that, or was there a sense that, you're watching LT, the year that he won his MVP, right? You're watching LT towards the latter end of his career. You're watching him, during like the 1991 Super Bowl run. Are you thinking to yourself at the time that, especially let's keep it with LT for now, then maybe we can branch off to some of the other players. Are you thinking to yourself when watching him, this is the greatest football player of my generation, of our time? This guy is changing the way that we're playing the game of football? Or are you simply just kind of like thinking to yourself, this guy's a really good player and I'm just enjoying watching him? Or is that allure that we kind of think of him and view him with now, was that happening like while he was playing?
No, I mean, what I would say with that, with LT especially, is that allure that everyone talks about was very real while he was playing, because he was such a larger than life player. And that's one of the things that when I like, and I actually will point it out in a lot of the clips that I'll post, and I'll say, here's LT doing this stuff. Like, here's him. And everyone remembers him running the interception back on Thanksgiving Day in Detroit. But I posted a clip of the year after that, where he actually chases down Billy Sims, and Billy Sims was basically the Barry Sanders of Detroit before Barry Sanders came. He wore number 20 and he was a great running back. LT chases him down like 40 yards down the field when he's first blocked. And he's doing things which were just something that you just didn't see before. So when you're kind of seeing greatness, and sometimes nostalgia will just glaze you over, which is why I like actually posting these old pics, these old videos and stuff, because there's a number of fans such as yourselves who are too young to see him in action. You're like, this is just some old guy talking about it was different in my day. I'm like, well, let's actually show what goes on. Like, you could see him sprinting down the field and making tackles on punt returns, which is something you wouldn't see somebody at 245 pounds doing back then. The thing that also you have to remember back then also was that, there was no internet. There was things where you were like, Monday Night Football was it. Like, that was the highlight of the week back then. When LT broke Theismann's leg, that's a moment that forget Giant fan, any football fan can tell you, I know where I was when I saw LT break Theismann's leg. And, they made it a storyline in The Blind Side, book and movie about this thing. So when you're watching, and when we were watching LT, like, you knew that he was different. And also he was someone who, he led a little bit of a wild lifestyle off the field, and people knew it. And look, let's face it, people look the other way and a lot of stuff with that, because on Sunday when he would play, he was a madman, and he was the type of person that he would go out there, and he was never dirty, but he beat the hell out of these guys. And as a Giant fan who grew up that, like, you want physical, tough defense, that's what you want. Like, you were watching Lawrence Taylor do this, but doing it at a faster speed, a higher level. He's running over offensive linemen. He's running down things, like Joe Gibbs had to change his entire offense to deal with him. The other thing that helped LT at the time also was Madden and Summerall, because Madden and Summerall in the 80s did, they were the top. They were the best announcing crew like you'll ever see. And that's why I love posting clips with them and pointing out stuff that they did and how they did stuff. Madden and Summerall, they were an event, and they would do a lot of Giant games because the Giants were, number one, the New York market, and number two, one of the best teams in the NFL. So that aligned with them being there. What John Madden said was almost like gospel for people. And John Madden would go out there and he would say, Lawrence Taylor is the best defensive player I've ever seen. Lawrence Taylor's doing things I've never seen before. And he made a comment, he has said it several times, and I've shown it in the different clips. He'd say, I never thought a defensive player could win a football game by himself until I saw Lawrence Taylor do it. So he said, he goes, the only guy close to him, he said, whoever he thought could win a game by himself was Reggie White on defense. Mm-hmm. But other than that, he goes, Lawrence Taylor's the only one who's ever done it. So when you're talking about the mystique and everything, we saw it for ourselves, and it just jumped out at you. And that's why it stuck.
And I'm so happy you mentioned John Madden and Pat Summerall, because Snacks, what we did earlier this offseason is we rewatched every Super Bowl. So we took 2 weeks in Super Bowls, there's 2 weeks. There's, the Pro Bowl that used to be the Pro Bowl week, and then it was the Super Bowl. So we took 2 episodes, 2 weeks to do the 2 Super Bowls, 1 week, the 2 Super Bowls the next. So we rewatched Super Bowl 21. The whole version's available on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And It was Summerall and Matt calling the game, and I was floored. I was floored
You're
at how
you're in awe of
Yeah.
just by. I'm sorry to interrupt, Justin, but I wanted to get that in there too. You're just in awe of how they call a game.
Yeah, and really, even if you just close your eyes and you don't know who they are, and you don't know that they're
Doesn't
Hall of
matter.
Famers, you don't know that they're the best at what they do, and you're just watching these guys, they kept you entertained, but they also kept you informed. BBVCR, they were showing. I'm a big analytics guy. I don't know if you've been following me. I know you've been following me for a little
Me
bit. I
too.
don't know how often you see some of the stuff that I post, especially during the regular season. I like to go nuts with the stats, not so much analytics, but I'm a big stats guy, and I include some analytics, but not too much. They were including next gen data, like next gen player tracking data in terms of, looking at the graphic that they showed to start the second half of Super Bowl 21 is John Elway's passing chart in terms of his 0 to 10 yards, 10 to 19, 20 plus yards. I'm like, this is next gen data. This is stuff that I crave while I'm watching the broadcast right now that I have to go and manually do or just look online myself to see if I can find it or anybody's posted it. They showed a Bronco defensive lineman, all the snap alignments that he's played. He's played this amount of snaps up the A gap, the B gap, C gap.
Carl Mecklenburg. It was Carl Mecklenburg. I remember.
Yes. Yes. So, that the way that they were, and not just them, but I'm sure it was their production team too, the way that they were able to break everything down, it was actually helpful information.
Madden Summerall were perfect. And the thing about what they brought to the table, and you touched on it, was they were able to entertain sort of the layman football fans, the people who just, they don't know what they they don't know anybody in these teams, but Madden could entertain them with the way he's describing. And yeah, like there's, the boom whap and stuff and the sounds he'd make. So he would do that to entertain. And when he's like, like even Madden was at his best in blowouts, because most time blowouts turn into these snore fests. Madden can do things where he's like circling the Gatorade bucket, and he's like, this is the baby bucket, the mama bucket and stuff. And I remember watching when he's doing that. Now, granted, I'm a Giant fan, so I was loving every second of Super Bowl 21, but he was doing things to entertain, but also he would get into the details, or he would telestrate. Like, he was one of the first that was like actually kind of, telestrating on the screen and drawing lines all over the place. And he's describing that, this is the strong side and you're moving over there. And he was using terms that were more inside NFL for the more detailed fan, but then quickly pulling back and then, giving the view to kind of make it entertaining. Summerall was the perfect straight man to what he was doing, because Summerall would give his analysis, and when Summerall's voice would like actually crack or get excited, you knew like something big was happening, because he would never do it. And I know I've shown the highlight a few times of the 49er playoff game when Banks forces an interception from Montana. Montana, he gets hit, just flings the ball up, and like Herb Welsh picks it off and laterals it to Elvis Patterson. The very next play, Joe Morris runs it in for like a 45-yard touchdown. And basically as soon as the ball snapped, Madden and Summerall understand that the Giants crowd is in a frenzy. They're getting crazy. The moment the line sort of opens up and Morris bursts through, all Summerall says is Morris is gone. He stops talking. He says nothing for a good 12, 15 seconds, which is almost impossible to think of today, because now announcers feel the need to fill the dead air all the time. They let
20, the 15, the 10, the
5, the touchdown, blah, blah, blah. Like, shut up.
Summerall didn't need it.
He didn't need it. He's shut. Like, we can see what's going on here. You're not calling radio. If you're on the radio, yes, do that. But in the TV medium, we can see it. Let us feel like we're in the crowd. So they brought you into the game, and they were so natural at it. And they, like I said, when they were they were at their A game, the top of their game in the mid to late 80s, which happened to coincide with the Giants run. That's why a lot of Giant fans who were, my age, older, who were there for it, identify with Madden and Summerall and the Giants, because when the Giants were at their best, Madden and Summerall at their best, and they were the ones that, like, if you got the two of them, you were the game that everyone wanted to see. Like, that was, you didn't have to say this is the game of the week, whatever. It was like, you knew it. Like, they're there. They're the ones. So that's how that worked out with Madden and Summerall.
Awesome.
So
awesome.
And I love how we compared announcers today in terms of what they do, what they do or what they don't do, and what Summerall and Madden were doing. So one of the things I want to do to kind of wrap up for this week is asking you just about the game of football that kind of used to be, because let's face it, I mean, and you can just interrupt me and tell me if I'm wrong right away. I feel like it's very different. It's a very different game compared to the game that was in the late 80s, early 90s, versus what's happening right now. One of my favorite stats that really trying to showcase that is in 1985, I believe it was Snacks, 1985, there was 30 different players with at least 10 sacks in the National Football League.
Yeah.
We
talked about that last week. Yeah.
Yeah. In 2020, there was 10 players with 10 plus sacks. So if anything, it just shows just how different the game is, how different defense is. And it's all about the quarterbacks, getting the ball out of their hands quick, and offense and scoring points and stuff like that. So I want to ask you, as you have been a fan and as your fandom has maybe kind of transformed, your Giants fandom and how you've watched games, has your investment in the game of football also changed? Because maybe it's not the game that you grew up with. Are you as invested into the Giants now, or are you invested into the game of football now as you did, as you were basically growing up and when you started to become a fan?
I'd say I'm still invested. I'd say that as you get older, and as you've seen in Pain Week, like I lived all that stuff that happened. I mean, I don't take the losses as much to heart as I used to. Like, I mean, I was catatonic after Flipper, for a while. I remember when Jerry Rice caught the touchdown in '88, I literally just like walked out of my house and I wandered, like, I don't even know what town I ended up in. I was just walking around because I just couldn't believe what happened. Now I'll watch it. I'm invested. I'll get upset by the stuff, but then I kind of like, okay, well, I'm, on the next week, moving on. Like, I don't know if it's just, I've, as a Giant fan, been there, done that. I've the Giants do invent new ways to lose, but I've seen a lot of the ways they can do that. So usually I can correlate it back to something else I've seen. And like, okay, I lived through that. I'll live through the next thing, on to the next week. But as from the game of football itself, and when you gave the point of, there's more sacks in 85, the way the NFL was played back then, the focus was the running game. And it was running backs. And that's why teams, they had, teams drafting multiple first round running backs. I mean, like the Giants drafted back to back Butch Wolfolk and Joe Morris, one year. So that's something you couldn't even fathom doing today. Like, your GM be fired if you drafted two running backs in rounds 1 and 2. But back then, everything was the running game. It was running games and defense. And if a quarterback threw for 300 yards, that usually meant they were losing. That usually because the focus was running the ball. Dan Marino, I mean, like before you had Dan Fouts, like with the Air Coryell stuff with the Chargers that changed that a bit, and what Marino did, but those guys were sort of they were not the norm. The average thing really was running the ball and trying to control it, get a big running back and pound it. The thing you also have to remember back in the 80s, when you see those sack numbers, and I pointed out too, and I showed a highlight over the weekend of Leonard Marshall, there was this in the grasp rule, which was something that was hit or miss, or you can just like come close to a guy, put your arms around him a little bit, and the refs would blow the whistle. And they say, that's a sack, that's it. And the one was like, he just barely grabbed Elway, and Jerry Markbright, the official, blew the whistle, and that's a sack. Back in the 80s, your quarterbacks were pocket passers. The scrambling quarterbacks were few and far between. You had an Elway who could run. You had Steve Young, who was not starting all the time, who could run a little bit. Randall changed everything.
Yeah, I was about to say Cunningham, especially in 1989, which we're going to get to in a couple minutes.
Randall changed everything, and he was like, I hated the hell out of the Buddy Ryan Eagles more than anything else, but Randall was a guy where you didn't see quarterbacks who could be the fastest guy on the field. Like we've now seen that. We've seen that with Vic. We've seen it with Lamar. Like we've seen this with these other quarterbacks. It's not that surprising anymore. Back then, you had Ron Jaworski sitting there waiting for LT to kill him, and Neil Lomax and stuff like that. So you had guys who just were not going to move. And unless you went the 49er route where they brought in the West Coast offense, where they got the ball out quickly, the Bill Walsh method, which is what then kind of has kind of spurred things on more that you see today. That was the very beginning back there, like in the 80s with Coryell would throw deep. Marino would throw deep. Marino had a fast release. Like Marino had some crazy thing where he wasn't sacked for, ton. I forget, like he held the record for the most games in a row without being sacked. I think he was sacked like 10 times one year in Miami because he'd just get rid of it. But those guys were the exception. If you were a pocket passer, you're getting sacked 40 or 50 times a year, especially if you're, in a season, especially if you're losing.
It's crazy. It's crazy how the times have changed.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Thank you to Big Blue VCR for coming on this week. It sounds like we ended in the middle of a sentence, and that's kind of true because part 2 of this interview is taking place next week. The last 15 minutes or so of the interview is taking place next week because Big Blue VCR, he's going to help us preview a new book we're starting. I'll get that book. We are starting No Medals for Trying by Jerry Eisenberg. If you've been listening to Bleeding Blue like pretty much the last 2 years, we've been hyping this book up for 2 years. The month of July, we're getting into it. We're previewing it next week. Month of July, all of July, we're going to do No Medals for Trying. So get excited for that. Big Blue VCR is going to help us preview the 1989 season, which this is when this book takes place during 1989. So until next week, keep on bleeding blue and peace.